Hello and welcome back. In this video, we are reading chapter 81, 82, and 83 of The Life of Pi. Chapter 81. I know my survival is hard to believe. When I think back, I can hardly believe it myself. My crude exploitation of Richard Parker's weak sea legs is not the only explanation. There is another. I was the source of food and water. Richard Parker had been a zoo animal as long as he could remember, and he was used to sustenance coming to him without his lifting a paw. True, when it rained and the whole boat became a rain catcher, he understood where the water came from, and when we were hit by a school of flying fish, there too, my role was not apparent, but these events did not change the reality of things, which was that when he looked beyond the gunwale, he saw no jungle that he could hunt in and no river which he could drink freely from. Yet I brought him food, and I brought him fresh water. My agency was pure and miraculous. It conferred power upon me. Proof? I remained alive day after day, week after week. Proof? He did not attack me, even when I was asleep on the top. Proof? I am here to tell you the story. Chapter 82. I kept rainwater and the water I collected from the solar stills in the locker out of Richard Parker's sight, in the 3 50-liter plastic bags. I sealed them with string. Those plastic bags couldn't have been more precious to me had they contained gold, sapphires, rubies, and diamonds. I worried incessantly about them. My worst nightmare was that I would open the locker one morning and find that all 3 had spilled, or worse still, had split. To forestall such a tragedy, I wrapped them in blankets to keep them from rubbing against the metal hull of the lifeboat, and I moved them as little as possible to reduce wear and tear. But I fretted over the necks of the bags. Would the string not wear them thin? How would I seal the bags if their necks were torn? When the going was good, when the rain was torrential, when the bags had as much water as I thought they could take, I filled the bailing cups, the 2 plastic buckets, the 2 multi-purpose plastic containers, the 3 beakers, and the empty cans of water, which I now preciously kept. Next, I filled all the plastic vomit bags, sealing them by twisting them shut and making a knot. After that, if the rain was still coming down, I used myself as a container. I stuck the end of a rain catcher tube in my mouth, and I drank and I drank and I drank. I always added a little seawater to Richard Parker's fresh water in a greater proportion in the days following a rainfall, in lesser during periods of drought. On occasion, in the early days, he dipped his head overboard and sniffed the sea and took a few sips, but quickly he stopped doing it. Still, we barely got by. The scarcity of fresh water was the single most constant source of anxiety and suffering throughout our journey. Of whatever food I caught, Richard Parker took the lion's share, so to speak. I had little choice in the matter. He was immediately aware when I landed a turtle or a dorado or a shark, and I had to give quickly and generously. I think I set world records for sawing open the belly shell of sea turtles. As for fish, they were hewn to pieces practically while they were still flopping about. If I got to be so indiscriminate about what I ate, it was not simply because of appalling hunger. It was also plain rush. Sometimes I just didn't have the time to consider what was before me. It either went into my mouth that instant or was lost to Richard Parker, who was pawing and stamping the ground and huffing impatiently on the edge of his territory. It came as an unmistakable indication to me of how low I had sunk the day I noticed with a pinching of the heart that I ate like an animal, that this noisy, frantic, unchewing wolfing down of mine was exactly the way Richard Parker ate. Chapter 83. The storm came on slowly one afternoon. The clouds looked as if they were stumbling along before the wind frightened. The sea took its cue. It started rising and falling in a manner that made my heart sink. I took in the solar stills and the net. Oh, you should have seen that landscape. What I had seen up till now were mere hillocks of water. These swells were truly mountains. The valleys we found ourselves in were so deep that they were gloomy. Their sides were so steep the lifeboat started sliding down them, nearly surfing. The raft was getting exceptionally rough treatment, being pulled out of the water and dragged along, bouncing every which way. I deployed both sea anchors fully at different lengths so that they would not interfere with each other. Climbing the giant swells, the boat clung to the sea anchors like a mountain climber to a rope. We would rush up until we reached the snow-white crest in a burst of light and foam and a tipping forward of the lifeboat. The view would be clear for miles around, but the mountains would shift and the ground beneath us would start sinking in the most stomach-sickening way. In no time, we would be sitting once again at the bottom of a dark valley, different from the last, but the same, with thousands of tons of water hovering above us and with only our flimsy lightness to save us. The land would move once more, the sea anchor ropes would snap to tautness, and the roller coaster would start again. The sea anchors did their job very well, in fact nearly too well. Every swell at its crest wanted to take us for a tumble, but the anchors beyond the crest heaved mightily and pulled us through, but at the expense of pulling the front of the boat down. The result was an explosion of foam and spray at the bow. I was soaked through and through each time. Then a swell came up that was particularly intent on taking us along. This time the bow vanished underwater. I was shocked and chilled and scared witless. I barely managed to hold on. The boat was swamped. I heard Richard Parker roar. I felt death was upon us. The only choice left to me was death by water or death by animal. I chose death by animal. While we sank down the back of the swell, I jumped onto the tarpaulin and unrolled it toward the stern, closing in Richard Parker. If he protested, I did not hear him. Faster than a sewing machine working a piece of cloth, I hooked down the tarpaulin on both sides of the boat. We were climbing again. The boat was lurching away upward unsteadily. It was hard to keep my balance. The lifeboat was now covered and the tarpaulin battened down, except at my end. I squeezed in between the side bench and the tarp and pulled the remaining tarp over my head. I did not have much space. Between bench and gunwale there was 12 inches, and the side benches were only 1.5 feet wide. But I was not so foolhardy, even in the face of death, as to move onto the floor of the boat. There were 4 hooks left to catch. I slipped a hand through the opening and worked the rope. With each hook done, it was getting harder to get the next. I managed 2 hooks left. The boat was rushing upward in a smooth and unceasing motion. The incline was over 30 degrees. I could feel myself being pulled down toward the stern. Twisting my hands frantically, I succeeded in catching 1 more hook with the rope. It was the best I could do. This was not a job meant to be done from the inside of the lifeboat, but from the outside. I pulled hard on the rope, everything made easier by the fact that holding onto it was preventing me from sliding down the length of the boat. The boat swiftly passed a 45-degree incline. We must have been at a 60-degree incline when we reached the summit of the swell and broke through its crest onto the other side. The smallest portion of the swell's supply of water crashed down on us. I felt as if I were being pummeled by a great fist. The lifeboat abruptly tilted forward and everything was reversed. I was now at the lower end of the lifeboat, and the water that had swamped it, with a tiger soaking in it, came my way. I did not feel the tiger. I had no precise idea of where Richard Parker was. It was pitch black beneath the top, but before we reached the next valley, I was half drowned. For the rest of the day and into the night, we went up and down, up and down, up and down, until terror became monotonous and was replaced by numbness and a complete giving up. I held onto the tarpaulin rope with one hand and the edge of the bow bench with the other, while my body lay flat against the side bench. In this position, water pouring in, water pouring out, the tarpaulin beat me to a pulp. I was soaked and chilled, and I was bruised and cut by bones and turtle shells. The noise of the storm was constant, as was Richard Parker's snarling. Sometime during the night, my mind noted that the storm was over. We were bobbing in the sea in a normal way. Through a tear in the tarpaulin, I glimpsed the night sky, starry and cloudless. I undid the tarp and lay on top of it. I noticed the loss of the raft at dawn. All that was left of it were 2 tied oars and the life jacket between them. They had the same effect on me as the last standing beam of burnt-down house that would have on a householder. I turned and scrutinized every quarter of the horizon. Nothing. My little marine town had vanished. That the sea anchors miraculously were not lost, they continued to tug at the lifeboat faithfully, was a consolation that had no effect. The loss of the raft was perhaps not fatal to my body, but it felt fatal to my spirits. The boat was in a sorry state. The tarp was torn in several places, some tears evidently the work of Richard Parker's claws. Much of our food was gone, either lost overboard or destroyed by the water that had come in. I was sore all over, and a bad cut on my thigh. The wound was swollen and white. I was nearly too afraid to check the contents of the locker. Thank God, none of the water bags had split. The net and the solar stalls, which had not entirely deflated, had filled the empty space and prevented the bags from moving too much. I felt exhausted and depressed. I unhooked the top at the stern. Richard Parker was so silent I wondered whether he had drowned, but he hadn't. As I rolled back the top to the middle bench and daylight came to him, he stirred and growled. He climbed out of the water and set himself on the stern bench. I took out needle and thread and went about mending the tears in the tarp. Later, I tied one of the buckets onto a rope and bailed the boat. Richard Parker watched me distractedly. He seemed to find nearly everything I did boring. The day was hot and I proceeded slowly. One haul brought me something I had lost. I considered it. Cradled in the palm of my hand was all that remained between me and death. The last of the orange whistles. Okay, that's chapter 83. Stay tuned for 84.